I mean, the term is thrown around rather liberally, but you could actually make a case that at least 3 of the Zelda games are, in fact, the best game ever.
I don't even really need to say much about Zelda. I mean, it is the game series.
Zelda, long-running series, brought out in 86, 87, sold 6.5, 7 million copies.
And back in those days, that was a lot of games to be selling. There are games now that are considered, you know, huge successes and don't sell a tenth of that.
Legend of Zelda is the greatest video game of all time, I think, especially for nostalgic value.
First of all, Zelda may have the best music of any video game ever produced.
What was the theme? How did the theme to Zelda go?
Characters that appear in every Zelda, first of all, my boy Link. Small guy, Robin Hood outfit.
Link looks like he's about 2.5 years old, so I assume that Zelda must be, you know, I don't know, 2, and those disturb me a little.
Zelda is your classic story of good and evil. Good being a green little dwarf, you know, against evil, which is a big pig.
The bad guy in the game that's been in every game is Ganon.
Ganon is the biggest warthog of your enemy warthogs.
And then there's Princess Zelda. You know, and Zelda is like the damsel in distress. You know, you're trying to rescue Zelda.
The myth is always sort of hazy. Link, you're gonna go find Zelda, your would-be girlfriend.
Your would-be girlfriend, or the girl we think that you're lusting after. Good luck. Here's a tiny little useless sword.
It's not like he had a job interview, or it wasn't as though he was the heir to the Link fortune or something. It's sort of just, go, you're Link, find her.
So you're Link, and you're in this world called Hyrule, and you're trying to get the Princess Zelda from Ganon. And I actually do think that Hyrule's a real place. I think it's in Long Island, and I think there's some great outlet malls there.
Zelda was one of the first games that had an expansive environment that you could explore on your own terms, and that was something that made it intensely cool.
It was the first time that it wasn't just get left to right. There was like a world. You could draw a map and you could explore and find secrets.
Because you have to remember, at the time, we were used to basic like side-scrolling games, you know, games that went from left to right, or games that the sole purpose of which was to rack up a high score, you know? You had Pac-Man, and you're like, you know, and this is the joystick for Pac-Man, just so you, and, you know, you're like 6,785. Your turn, Jimmy.
Not so in The Legend of Zelda. If you move into another screen, there's something else. There's a forest, there's a cave, there's a seashore, there's a cemetery. You know, and all of these things, there's a world.
The second best thing about this cartridge was that it had like this own little memory microchip thing, and it could keep track of your progress.
I mean, that's a huge innovation in the industry. That was probably one of the big selling points. You know, people are like, wow, this game can actually be played later. I don't have to try to sit down and win it all at once or pause it and leave it overnight. I can, you know, save it.
Whoever thought of that? Einstein, but Japanese.
There weren't a lot of other games, really, where it would merit having some sort of system where you could save it.
But this, to actually beat it, it's more like really an epic quest. Like, it's gonna take you several days your first time through to find everything. And that's something that no video game had really done before. I mean, it's pretty standard these days for a video game to have like a beginning, middle, and an end. And it sounds silly, but that's not how all games worked back then.
And a game like that, you could save, go do dinner. I'm gonna go do my homework, Mom. Except my homework is finding Zelda.
Yeah.
Another thing about the game when it first came out was the first Nintendo game that had, it was done in like this gold finish.
The gold cartridge. It's great because I had a shoebox, which I kept all my Nintendo games in, and it was like gray, 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 gold, gray, 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 gray.
It was just sort of saying, hey, you know, this is different. Try it. Little bit more special than your 14th bug shooter.
The evolution of the Zelda series is a really cool thing to observe.
You know, the game has been a 2D side scroller, a top-down view, a puzzle-oriented view, a three-dimensional game. I mean, the game has been everything.
There is a Zelda game for every system.
You know, going ahead in time, going back in time. You also have like the getting stuck in time.
Original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Game Boy, and GameCube.
As the series progresses, the game eventually turns into a game about Link. I mean, it's a lot about Link's quests and Link's journey through you know, through adulthood or through just his life.
You start out with The Legend of Zelda. From that, you know, they were like, hey, you know what? People like this game, maybe we should make another one. And they came out with The Adventures of Link.
It was different. I mean, it wasn't good. Nobody really liked it too much.
I mean, it's not a bad game, but it doesn't really, like, the rest of them almost define, like, video game perfection. Like, the rest of them are all, like, masterpieces. And that second one, it's just all right.
Zelda 2, it wasn't a bad game, it just wasn't on par with the original Zelda, and it also tried to bring in a 2D, almost Mario-type fighting scenario that didn't fit with the original vision of the game.
And I also recall that Link was a little taller in the second version. He had like lost some weight or something. And it bothered me because I missed the cute little chubby Link in the first game.
He was like tall and thin, and he looked more like the actual elves that I've known in my life.
So what do you remember most about Legend of Zelda 2?
Not anywhere near as good as the first one.
They're probably gonna use that. Yeah, that's good.
Link to the Past, the third game in the Zelda series, is, in my opinion, the best of them.
I mean, still, Link to the Past is one of the few games I could pop in like 10 years later.
It had the traditional three-quarter view Zelda gameplay, but the graphics had improved to a degree where the trees were mesmerizing to look at. The way that the shadows worked when you were dealing with tiered mountain environments looked great.
The puzzles were really cool. There was that two-world system, and you could go from Hyrule to the Dark World at any point with your magical mirror. But like, if you could go to a certain point, you'd see points in the Dark World, you couldn't access them unless you went back to the Light World and teleported into the Dark World at a certain spot. It opened up a whole lot of possibilities.
There's an interplay there between light and dark, between outer and inner, because it's the same map. I mean, there's a level of delicacy and subtlety that you just don't get from smashing people's heads in with axes.
Basically, Link to the Past was just saying, hey man, we're all here on this planet. Let's just all get along. You know, even if you're a Moblin, or you're an Octorok, like, let's just hang out.
Ocarina of Time is my favorite Zelda game. I don't know what it was about it. Maybe it was the little flute and, you know, the whirlwinds and the time shifting, but yeah, I liked Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time really knocked it. They just knocked it out of the park with that spider at the beginning.
My favorite part of that game, I came in, after my friend got it, I went over to his house, and I walked downstairs and he's playing it, and I just look up and I see Zelda, and he's holding a chicken above his head, and he's playing this flute. And I'm like, what is going on? What is this game? And then like lightning strikes or something, and I was like, this is a good game. This is the game for me.
Then there was Majora's Mask, which was like the Groundhog Day of the Zelda series. You had one day which had to keep playing over and over and over again. And really, the Japanese knew what they were doing then, because obviously Americans can't think past 24 hours.
Majora's Mask was a sequel to the Ocarina of Time, which took place in a little part of the area that the Ocarina of Time is in. And it was just basically a beat-the-clock game. And beating the clock is fun, but that's high art. You don't beat the clock as the game. That's what you do after you've mastered the game. So Majora's Mask really didn't appeal to a whole lot of people.
Majora's Mask is like one of those games that either you really get into or you get really frustrated. The same thing keeps happening over and over again. You're looking around for masks. It's like being ridiculously drunk at Halloween.
I think I spend my entire life repeating the same day over again in my mother's basement.
Wind Waker, the newest Zelda game, is very cool. It's like a cartoon.
That to me was taking games in a new direction. It didn't really alter the gameplay of like Ocarina of Time, but by animating things, you were actually able to feel, you know, what the characters felt because you could see it in their eyes and you could read it on their faces.
Wind Waker for the GameCube is one of those games that you have to play. There's like, especially if you're on some type of drugs. Not that, I'm not saying you should do them, but if you happen to be on some and you're playing the game, perfect, because there's fish that you can talk to. You can sail around on a boat who's really a lion. There's millions of non-player characters that you can interact with in the towns. And you just sail around and you can like pick up treasure out of the ocean with a grappling hook. And you can just, you know, explore everything. So it's more spread out than the others.
What I know about Wind Waker is that there was a lot of controversy with Zelda fans about that game. You've taken like Link, this, you know, they are accustomed to, and changing him and making him like very cartoony and more childlike.
I didn't like Wind Waker too much. I'm a purist. I liked the old school games.
Some people were really upset about it. They were like, no, my crusading elf hero will be presented in a very realistic manner. I don't want this cartoony kid stuff. But I think it was just an interesting decision they made to, you know, changed the game, presented it in a new way.
You know, because you're so small, you have to negotiate things in a different way. And you have to explore in ways that you didn't explore in other games. If he were just like a big, you know, strapping hero with a giant sword, it wouldn't be interesting. And you have to be inventive because you're not strong enough to just plow your way through. And that's really what the game's about. It's about being clever. And it's about enjoying cleverness.
But Link has exploded into this famous game character, so much so that they use him in other games from time to time. He does cameos, but he's been in Super Smash Brothers, and nowadays you can find him kicking some ace, okay, in Soul Calibur.
It was really cool, and he had a whole bunch of moves, and he looked like the older, more refined elves that I've come to know.